good morning. Buongiorno tutti. Please be seated. We are going to start with our first thematic plenary on the environment and e-government. And time is running, so I'd like to get on with it. Thank you. Well, my name is Hugo, and I work for the environment, and so do you. That is clear. I also wear a tie, which usually I don't, so that illustrates the importance of this session. It's another one. Now, we are in Florence, Renaissance and all that, and I'm going to tell you a few things which are true. Absolutely true. The Earth is the center of the universe. Or not. And now I quote from sources which I cannot reveal. Inspire doesn't work. Or does it? We don't know. We have to find out. Now, this conference, the focus of this conference is to take stock of what we have achieved since putting this machinery into motion, since 2007. And why do we need to take stock? Because next year, in May, we, the Commission, will have to report back to the Council and the Parliament where we stand. This is a threat, this is an opportunity. And it's quite logical that we do this mid-term assessment, because Inspire has grown up. It's not anymore a baby, it's not anymore a toddler. It has reached adult age, and it's about time that it starts to carry its load. It has to start delivering. So we're going to look at a number of thematic areas today and see where we stand. We will have a very interesting panel, and we will have a number of questions which turn around our Inspire principles, which lie at the basis of this directive. Now, without further ado, I would like our friends over there to bring up the first slide. And from my presentation, obviously. And at the same time, I would again like to thank Professor Bernardo de Bernardinis, Ezio Buzzoletti, Maria della Costa, Carlo, and all our Italian friends who are also part of the program committee and who have helped me to bring this panel together and actually organize this conference. Many thanks. And of course, many thanks to you for showing up again so numerously. Some have said in previous Inspire conference, you are just a group of believers. You're only representing yourselves. This is not true. Many of you come from projects, from communities. You are national coordinators. You represent hundreds of people who are struggling, who are benefiting, who are working hard. And I would like to underline that. So there we go. As you see, I'm not anymore the chief scientist, Research and Innovation Unit. DG Environment has decided to reorganize and to focus all its directives and legal activities within one unit, which is now called Governance, Information and Reporting Unit. Governance is something I'm going to mention quite a few times in my presentation. Next slide, please. Title of the presentation says the environmental agenda. What was on the agenda a bit more than 10 years ago was this. The priorities, the strategies, the mitigation of man-made hazards, which also explained why for many years, together with Maria and Professor de Bernardinis, we joined forces to convince space community and industry that we needed to do something. And of course, already then, the emphasis was on knowledge-based policy making, implementation and monitoring. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. When we came together with our friends from EA, JRC, and many experts from the member state, They have formulated these INSPIRE principles. Later on, they have been hijacked, they have been reused for things like SIZE and CIFS and other acronyms, which I'm not going to elaborate too much on here. But it's against these principles that we need to see how effective our legal framework and the actions that you have undertaken in your countries have been. Next slide. Because basically they collapse into one thing. Thank you, Claire. Sharing is everything. And in order to be able to do that without spilling too much, because that would be wasteful, we need to have clear rules. We need to have rules in place. And here, I'm not on the same line as Google's geospatialist, my friend Ed Parson, who at a conference recently said, the best legislation is no legislation. I cannot agree with that. Well, for one reason, I work for an organization who does legislation. So it also pays my rent, by the way. So I cannot afford that. And I don't believe in it. Actually, in the 18th century, a little bit after the Renaissance, there was a French philosopher, La Brocardère, who said, and I like that very much, c'est la liberté qui opprime et c'est la loi qui affranchit. Freedom is actually suppressing us. Legislation is something that establishes. So somewhere in between those two, between Ed Parson and La Brocardère, we must be with INSPIRE. Next slide. What's on the agenda today? Well, you know all the EU 2020. I'm not going to go into detail, but just recently, last week, Commission, Council and Parliament reached political agreement on the 7th Environmental Action Plan. And you see our Commissioner, Janez Potočnik, he's enjoying very much our plan. And clearly, read very well there, enhance Europe's ecological resilience, transform the EU into an inclusive and sustainable green economy. Nice. Principles. Ideas. Next slide. How does it look like? 3 thematic priority objectives, supported by an enabling framework. I put it in red. INSPIRE, according to some of my colleagues, is part of this enabling framework. I told them, no, INSPIRE is in any of these priorities. Because the moment you want to undertake an assessment on where we stand in protecting nature, in strengthening this ecological resilience, you're going to launch a study, you're going to do an impact assessment to amend a piece of legislation or set up another collaborative framework, you are going to need the data. And you're going to be assessing risks. And for assessing risks, you will need all the information and data which becomes accessible through our spatial data infrastructure. So INSPIRE is cross-cutting. Of course, it's a very important tool for the implementation of EU law. And I will come back to that at a later stage. Next slide. We have traveled a long way from the principle. As Dr. Rebetti before has shown, we have now all these data specifications into place. We have services defined how they should function. We need to implement them. We need to hook them up for a wide range of use cases, from the local, from the regional, up to the European, even the global level. And that's why we are also with INSPIRE. My friend Alessandro Noni is the co-chair of the Architecture and Data Group of GeoGeos, for example. We need to be able to relate, to integrate information up to the highest levels of detail of all these spatial objects which are out there in applications. One of the applications, just one, important one, is reporting. Now, reporting is a little bit of a, it's a kind of an amorph body. Many different ways of reporting. We see it evolving. We see how it goes into one direction under one piece of legislation, in another direction there. We need to work on that. But the vision, which I share with many of my colleagues, that reporting to the EU levels is not efficient. And I will tell you why. First of all, we need to agree with all of you on what kind of data needs to be transferred. Let's aggregate. We don't have that. We don't have that here. Difficult negotiations. What are they going to do with it? Well, obviously, in each piece of legislation, we have set collectively targets. So much emissions. So many days can you actually go over a certain emission level a year. That's called compliance. That's something we need to check. But when these reports, when this data is finally aggregated, goes with our colleagues in the EEA, with our colleagues in Eurostat, becomes available to our policy officers, and we receive a complaint from a worried citizen or from an NGO about something that is happening somewhere, then we turn to this reporting data and we notice, well, actually, the facts and figures are 2-3 years old. My colleagues, the lawyers, they contact the member states. Member states come back, they say, well, you know, but the situation has changed. You're not working with the latest data and information. We can't do our job. This is not good governance. Good governance, and that's in the concept of one of those new acronyms that has been put in a communication on implementation called CIFS. Not going to explain what it is, the acronym at least, but what we want to achieve with it in the long run. What we believe is that information on state of environment, but also on the degree of compliance, almost on a per day basis, should be made available, not by the EEA, not by the European Commission, but by those organizations who have been put in place by the citizens in the region to inform their citizens. And in addition, reporting every 3 years, every 5 years, please send us your plan about what you are going to do in your river basin. Send us your plan, what you are going to do about noise. Send us your plan about what you're going to do about the floods. Excuse me. I would like to know today what my government, my city, is doing about the noise that is bothering me. We have to become proactive. The moment you have agreed on certain actions, make them immediately available to your citizens. Don't wait for 8 years or 3 years to publish them and send them to the Commission. It's too late. We want to have more proactive, immediate, up-to-date information available to the citizens, to all those that are concerned. And this is one of the challenges which relate to improving implementation in the member states. Next slide. Fine, we have an SDI. Lovely. Some people call it the first generation SDI because it's product oriented. We produce products. We don't produce applications. On top of this, we need to start developing applications precisely to support what I said before. This is one developed in Ireland by the government, an app to report on invasive species involving the public. These are the applications we need for good governance. Next slide. I like this. You know, one of the big flagship programs of EU 2020 is resource efficiency. DG Environment is heavily involved in the resource efficiency flagships, actually leading on this. My colleagues working on sustainable consumption and production have recently come out with a communication, and they have set up a voluntary scheme together with companies that produce products, food industry and others. They have designed 2 measures, 2 indicators. The product environmental footprint, the organization environmental footprint. Ladies and gentlemen, this opens enormous opportunities for applications because you can now go shopping. You have your app. You will know automatically which product has the highest environmental footprint. We can put in place, if the applications are there, incentives, for example, collecting points, green nudges, green leaves, whatever, that would stimulate the consumers to buy these products. These are very important initiatives, and we can help them implementing. Next slide. Well, of course, there are also challenges, there are risks, there are threats. At the same time, I've only scratched at the surface, the tip of the iceberg of all the possibilities. Now, collectively, as we have done for the preparation, we will have to think where we want to carry Inspire to. We will need to look at its weaknesses and its strengths. We will need to identify also certain threats. We have learned a lot collectively. The workshops the last 2 days were extremely interesting. We know that it was not perfect. We have an opportunity to improve it. And this is going to be focus of my work, colleagues in the EEA, and you collectively over the next months. Next slide. None. This is good news, because that means that we can move on. And I can ask, can I please have the agenda back on?